turn on your videos. Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for joining the 25th session of the Sustainability Insight. Firstly, I'd like to introduce our organizing team from UNESCO Jakarta. My name is Sachi Suzuki, JFIT coordinator. And here we have Lokmi Handani Akbal, Gani Mulia, and Chiptaya Matsanda, and Martin Lashobunsu. The title of today's session is Knowledge Networks and Harnessing Resilience Against Disasters. We proudly present Professor Shahbaz Khan, the Director of UNESCO Regional Science Bureau for Asia and Pacific, as a moderator. And we have two distinguished speakers, Professor Yuichi Ono from International and Regional Cooperation Office of International Research Institute of Disaster Science, Tohoku University, and he's joining from Sendai, Japan. And then Dr. Markus Buchhorn, the General Manager of Asia Pacific Advanced Network, and he's joining from Canberra, Australia. We are ready to take your questions through the Q&A box and the Facebook comments. If you wish to receive the certificate, please fill the attendance list, which we are going to share during the webinar. Professor Shahbaz, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, dear Dr. Sachi. It's a wonderful day to meet two dear colleagues. I have very high respect for both of them, and both of them have done a wonderful job for the world, which we will learn more. So Professor Ono certainly is a very big name in the area of disaster risk reduction, and he has worked with the United Nations. He's a leading major center in the university, as well as actively networking, and we will see he's a pioneer in his own way, initiating special forums, special ideas related to Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. And also I'm very pleased to welcome again Dr. Markus from Australia. He's a wonderful colleague, starting from astrophysics into information technology and infrastructure for knowledge networks. We will hear more about that. Let me start first with Professor Ono. Professor Ono, today we are going to focus on this area of knowledge networks and resilience. So if you can give your view about what is resilience and how it can help us during these difficult times and with the disasters which always continue.
Yeah. Thank you, Shahbaz. Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. The resilience, I think many people has a different reception of this concept of resilience, depending on the occasions, situations, maybe used differently. But in disaster risk reduction field, this term resilience was introduced, at least in my knowledge, was the 2005-2006 time when the UN organized the second World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction. It was before Sendai. The Hyogo Framework for Action was adopted in Kobe in 2005. At that time, the UN used the resilience in the, actually it was a subtitle of the Hyogo Framework. It says building the resilience of nations and communities to disasters. So that was maybe officially in the UN language, at least in this DRR, used the first time. But of course, the resilience word existed beforehand, but it was not very much widely used by the DRR communities. Then when I hear resilience, I think of bamboo, in the forest, the bamboo forest. The bamboo bends. Bamboos bend, but it's not broken. It come back, swing back to as it was. So this against strong wind or some shocks, disasters, the society may be affected some a little bit, but it'll recover quickly or bend back, build back better. So the another word I imagine for this resilience is build back better, which was one of the 4 key concepts in the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. So when big disaster happens, the society got impact, and the key is how we can build back better or build back swifter, early to the original stage. the economic growth may continue without disaster, but the disaster hit, then any country, there's some level of disaster damage and loss, slow down the economic growth. Then it tried to regain the momentum to the original pace. But if the resilience level or the DRR capacity level is lower, then speed to come back to original pace of the economic growth will take longer, and it may not recover as it was. Maybe disaster, if a series of disasters hit the country, the economic level may not go sustainable. So that's sort of resilience I think of after in this context of the disaster.
Thank you very much. That's the most comprehensive definition and most easy to understand. I like your bamboo analogy, and then also the build back better concept. I just have a follow-up question on this, Professor Ono. In bamboo, the resilience is already there because bamboo is bamboo, because it's very elastic. Communities, do they already have resilience? Can we build more resilience? How do we do capacity building for resilience?
Yes, for community, yes, of course. But I think it's also important to for the national government, for the because Sendai or Hyogo, the targeted first countermeasure to be adopted was national government. If national government does not have a good concept or policy, the local governments may be difficult to adapt for the concept. So I think NDMO's, National Disaster Management Office of each government, each country, should adapt this resilience concept, build back better concept. Then is transforming this information to the local communities or municipalities. They would be easily adapting this. So this is actually the sense of the Sendai framework's one of the 7 targets, which is due this year, 2020, the target E. The target E of the Sendai framework is to cope with the national local disaster reduction strategies. The number of countries, the increasing this number of countries who have the national and local government's policy for the management of a disaster. So that's I think the key for the local governments to adapt this concept.
Thank you very much. That's really very comprehensive. The concept is, if we are stuck with the disaster, how quickly can we come back to the same or better situation, and how our economy can recover. And certainly this is a very important concept also for this COVID situation as well. So I will come back with further questions to you. But thank you very much for making it so clear and so easy. Your students are so lucky to learn from you this concept of the bamboo bending with strong wind and then coming back. So that's really critical for us to understand. And how do we become more resilient in our life to deal with any disasters and at the national and different level. Let me now come to Dr. Markus. Dr. Markus, you have also an amazing background. I study from your CV. You are an astrophysicist coming to information technology. Can you please tell us about your journey from astrophysics to IT, and how do you contribute to these knowledge networks, and what are the knowledge networks themselves?
Thank you, Shahbaz, and greetings to all the viewers. My history is that I did my PhD in astronomy because I really loved the idea of being paid to do something I was already enjoying as a hobby, and understanding how the universe worked and how the solar system worked and how the planets and galaxies work and so on. And I like the logic of physics and science and how you can predict and model things and so on. And for a range of reasons, one of which was involved my to-be wife, I decided to look at other areas surrounding astronomy, to stay in Australia because astronomers, there aren't many in the world. You have to travel and it's difficult when you're married. But the basic thing was that IT is so fundamental now to astronomy. And we now have the case where astronomers can do most of their research and never visit a telescope. They can remotely visit a facility, they can access data sets anywhere in the world, even off the world from space telescopes, in the future lunar telescopes. That means that astronomers have to be very IT literate, and they can do a huge amount of research without having the inconvenience, let's face it, of going out to a remote telescope. And that kind of led me into understanding how important networks were, how important IT was. And to take, I guess, your second part in terms of the knowledge networks, astronomy has long been a discipline that has an understanding of the importance of its data, and its data can only be collected once. People think of taking a measurement of a particle or a chemical reaction or things like that. If you need to check, you can do it again. In astronomy, you can only measure once. It's like measuring the weather. The weather is different the next day. And so astronomers have always been very good at using IT to manage their data, to collect it, and then the ability to look at data trends over time. How are those objects moving? And in some cases, the accidental discovery of something in that data is Earth, important to the whole planet. If we're talking about disasters, we might talk about the meteor that took out the dinosaurs. We now have the ability to track them further and further back in space and time. And so the sort of confluence of IT and astronomy was let me into this. I think you were also asking about knowledge networks more broadly. One of the things, I have a very technical background, but one of the things that was really important to me was this idea of collaboration. The idea that most disciplines these days, most of the grand research problems are not being solved by one individual researcher anymore. It's teams of people, and they're not in one location. They are all over the globe. We have some major instruments, some major telescopes, particle accelerators, weather satellites, and so on, that have thousands of researchers working on them. And so we're now seeing research as a far more collaborative activity. And the same with education, it's becoming far more collaborative as well. So I see knowledge networks firstly as a human concept of linking people with data, with knowledge, with resources, and with problems. And then to enable that, we require the physical infrastructure that underpins that connectivity.
That's really very comprehensive way for describing. So there is data, there certainly are many innovations and research which is happening, and we can only be better if we connect with what is already there, and there needs to be networking of the people together and of course the organizations. So thank you very much for that introduction. Also, now I understand very well from astrophysics to IT, there is a purpose in it, because certainly for all the astrophysicists, they need to network with each other. But now you are helping all disciplines with this network, what we call APAN. What is APAN, dear Dr. Markus?
So APAN it stands for the Asia Pacific Advanced Network. What happens is in pretty much every country on Earth now, there are organizations that are set up to build the physical networks that link research and education institutions, all the universities, all the schools, all the government agencies, the hospitals, in some cases, the museums and archives, cultural institutions, anywhere where there's research and education occurring. And we refer to those organizations within each country as the National Research and Education Network, the NREN. APAN is a partnership of all of those NREN organizations in every country, from Pakistan in the west, all the way through to Japan in the east, down to Australia, New Zealand in the south. And we may extend further into the Pacific Islands one day. And we basically work on that physical connectivity, sure. But the major reason APAN was set up was to actually enable the human networking to occur. So the major working groups in APAN, in fact, the first one was agriculture. One of the current big, and it's still there, and it's one of the biggest. Other working groups include telemedicine, who of course have a rather busy time at the moment. We have a disaster and risk mitigation working group as well, which of course has worked closely with UNESCO in the past. And so we have a lot of these research community working groups in APAN. We also have the network engineering working groups for all the technologists out there. But the main idea is that the conversations, we have 2 meetings each year in different locations, different countries, when we're allowed to meet, of course. And we basically get 300-400 people talking about how does the infrastructure support the research needs? How do we help these researchers get together to collaborate, to share information? And by moving it between different countries, and we're not just always meeting in the developed economies, we meet in the developing economies, the least developed countries as well. We expose all of this buzzing of activity around collaboration to all the other countries in the region. And within our region, we then export, or we make that visible globally as well. So we partner with Europe, with the African, the Arab state networks, with North and South America as well. And so we embed all these conversations in that international community. And of course, technically, we help build the networks to reach those institutions.
That's very comprehensive again. Thank you very much. So basically, it's first of all about people. It's not about the IT or the big computers only. People knowing people, working with each other, then linking with the thematic issues which you have highlighted, and DRR is one of them certainly. And as you described, Professor Markus, agriculture where it started and very big. So I will come back to you in a moment to understand more of these differences which may exist between countries and how do we progress together on this issue of connectivity. So let me come back to Professor Ono in Sendai. And my question is about a framework which is also with the same name, Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. So can you, Professor Ono, tell us what does this Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction means, and what, in your view, is the status of this particular framework in terms of building resilience?
Yes, the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, it was the third UN negotiated document after Yokohama Strategy and Plan of Action in 1994 or 5, and then 2005 on this Hyogo framework. But all the frameworks, meaning the sort of revolution from disaster management after disaster humanitarian actions, after disaster, to the pre-disaster, the before disaster happens to reduce the disaster risk. So that's a revolution. It's written in several components. That's Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. In Sendai, what was new in Sendai was they achieved for the member countries, agreed on the targets. That never happened before for the disaster risk reduction field. But because of the 2030 SDGs, they needed to come up with specific targets, so reducing number of deaths, economic losses, and so on. So the 7 global targets were initiated. So that was a new. So still, there's a huge gap in terms of money used in the disaster managers. The most money, maybe 90% of the fund, is used for after disaster, distributing food, water, the medical issues, which is important. But it's adding the more emphasis on the pre-disaster, not to have the disaster. So that's a component of the Sendai. Then it's been 5 years already. Then, as I said, one of the 7 targets is due this year, 2020, for the target E, to increase the number of countries having the central and local government strategy for disaster. And in terms of the monitoring, I don't hear very well from a UNDRR these days, meaning after the coronavirus spread all over the world. I think the coronavirus, the COVID-19, significantly affected even monitoring of the Sendai, maybe SDGs as well. So the countries have been struggling to deal with this current big problem. So the other issues were sort of slowed down to monitor, and progress report is not coming yet, and so on. So I have been also looking forward that the UNDRR is announcement on the progress, so which I don't know for sure these days. So that's a challenge. And in COVID-19, this pandemics is becoming part of the risk we talk about within the scope of the Sendai framework. it's a matter of medical matter, and WHO is in charge, but it's at the same risk for the considered like animal attacks or the snake bites, and those are also risk, not a disaster caused by natural hazards, but the Sendai has scoping this in the same way. So that's we deal with corona pandemics as one of the risks for disaster risk reduction matters.
Thank you very much. So Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction started 5 years ago, and it has specific targets like the SDGs, and there's 7 of them. And this year, the International Day of Disaster Risk Reduction also celebrated Target E, and because this is very critical. Professor Ono, not every country is the same. Japan is a wonderful country with many innovations in science and technology, but also a country who has put a lot of effort into disaster risk reduction and getting people prepared, and the university system with eminent professors like you, and there are many other colleagues. We have a special center, as you know, ICHAM in Scuba. So can you please tell me within Asia Pacific, how you see, and you have also worked with the United Nations, with SCAP, you have also helped WMO and bigger efforts of the whole UN. How you see the differences in Asia Pacific in terms of the level of preparedness before disaster? When a disaster strikes, everyone is in a panic. Everyone wants to go there and help. But what are the differences in the level of preparedness? You think the university systems in other parts of the world are also improving as it is in Japan?
Well, Asia Pacific region, this is heavily affected by disasters because of the geography and those tectonic plates and so on. So that we have hydrometeorological and geological disasters in comparison with other region. I think we have more people affected by disaster and killed by disaster and so on. And our monsoon climate with heavy rain and rainy season, that certainly causes flooding. And if the precipitation does not come, then it becomes drought. So the management in water is very key, and the UNESCO team and also the ICHAM, they are dealing with these water-related disasters. And in case of Japan, maybe most of our cities and farmland and industrial area are located in the floodplain area. So without dealing with flood or the disasters, we cannot survive. We cannot have economic growth. So that's why we are very seriously investing the money and the people in the disaster risk reduction field for a long time. The first institution in university was developed after the Kanto, Tokyo area big earthquake in 1923. So the Tokyo University had this earthquake research institute, then followed by Kyoto University, which produced the 1960s after typhoon. They have hydrometeorological disaster sort of reduction. So Kyoto University Center on the preparedness of disaster center. Then Tohoku in 2011 had tsunami. So big disaster, after big disasters, government would invest money for university research institute so that they can work on preventing the next disaster, minimizing damage of next disaster. That's the tradition of Japan. I have some other examples, but the university, not only these 3 universities, but many other universities are dealing with disaster because we think the economic development and the disaster risk reduction is the same issue. Without DRR, we cannot grow the Japan's economy. So that's we learned after the World War II that in 1940s and 50s, we have a series of big flooding and typhoon-related disasters, which killed more than 100 to sometimes 1,000 people when we were very poor. But we invested, the government invested 3 to 5%, maybe more percentage of the national economy to the DRR, and 1% of GDP in DRR, since we are very poor. So that then continuously investing in the same amount of money and resources, then we were able to increase the capacity, DRR capacity. So it takes a long time, but investment is, I think, the sustainable investment is key to the current Japan. We still have a new challenge of climate change, but maybe I summarize later.
Okay. Uh, that's really very interesting that Japan has persistently invested over a longer period of time to reach to a level where there is a right kind of knowledge, there are universities, there are centers, but certainly disasters do not stop, Professor, as we know, because of the man-made as well as because of the natural reasons. What is your assessment for the interest of colleagues? Is the number of casualties going down with the as disasters strike in Japan with all these efforts in terms of resilience?
Yes, the number of deaths, number of killed people in Japan has been decreasing until maybe for maybe several decades until now. But right now, again, it's maybe a little bit increasing due to the maybe heavy, strong typhoons affecting the population and so on. So we started to see some change in the number of killed people in Japan, not increasing sharply, but we started seeing some events which would affect it. Then in terms of number of people killed in the Asian or the world, I think after Hyogo framework time, 2005 to 2015 and 2015 to right now, the number of deaths is not increasing all over the world. There are some big disasters which kill many people, but in average is people killed by disaster is stabilized. On the other hand, economic losses and number of disasters, those are increasing sharply. So it's an interesting trend.
Yeah, so even smaller disasters can have bigger economic impacts because maybe the world has grown in terms of the GDP, in terms of the wealth. So that's where maybe we need to become even more resilient and more vigilant. I will come back to you, Professor, but certainly all these efforts are helping us become more resilient as the number of deaths are going down and disasters are not decreasing. We have to learn more. So all those viewers who have joined us on Zoom and on Facebook Live, please continue to put your questions and we will certainly attend to them either during or after the webinar. Let me come back to Markus now. Dear Dr. Markus, you have described the APAN, which is bringing research and education networks, and you started giving us some of the examples like the National Research and Education Network, like in Pakistan, and usually these are with the ministries of education, for example. Can you please tell us the differences, like how these networks compare with each other in terms of their infrastructure, in terms of their skills, the willingness of the people to network with each other, and how you are helping build capacity between these knowledge networks?
That's a big question. So when we look at the economies across the Asia Pacific, APAN spans more than half the world's population. And we have 3, if not 4, of the top 5 countries in terms of scale actively involved in APAN. If we're talking about China and India, Indonesia, the Philippines, these are very large countries. And then we have much smaller countries. Australia is only 25 million people, which I think is about roughly equivalent to the extended area of Tokyo. And then at the other end of the scale, we have very small countries, and we're talking about like Nepal, Bhutan, Timor-Leste, maybe one day as well, where the populations are quite small, a few million people at most. And so in each case, every country has recognized the importance of an NREN, of a National Research and Education Network. And they're all working towards it. In some cases, they are set up as partnerships of the universities and the higher education institutions. In many economies in Asia, it is a creation of a ministry, not always the education ministry, sometimes a science ministry, sometimes a communications ministry. And in fact, in a few economies, it's in fact several of them, they all independently build networks as well. So the deployment of those networks depends a lot on the willingness of the government in each case to invest in those networks. Do they only want to reach the universities? Do they want to reach universities and the K-12 education institutions? Do they want to reach the hospitals and medical research institutes, cultural institutes, and so on? So there's a bit of diversity as to the reach of those networks, but the value proposition is strongly understood. Excuse me. On the flip side, though, the willingness, the enthusiasm and energy of the people working on those networks is uniform across the region. Everybody understands the value of building those networks, connecting more people, connecting more research institutions, connecting more educators. And so they work very hard to collaboratively build the best possible network. These are networks that run parallel to the commodity internet, and they perform tens, if not hundreds, if not thousands of times better than the commodity internet you get in your home. And so they enable researchers to move big data sets around, or for educators to reach very, very large communities, thousands of students, much, much bigger than you can reach locally. So when these networks are being built, the network engineers are looking to each other within the country and between countries to understand what are the best practices. How do you build a strong network? And in fact, the word resilience applies to human networks and to physical networks.
Okay. How
do you make sure that a single earthquake off the coast of Taiwan does not impact the entire internet for Asia? Sadly, we don't always learn that lesson. And 10, 15 years ago, we had a massive outage with one of the larger earthquakes in the region there. But now we're seeing, with especially the RNA networks, they're building a lot more resilience. They're building multiple paths. And so particularly the APAN meetings and a few other communities, we get the network engineers together and they all say, this is how we're building something. And somebody else says, actually, if you do this, it'll be twice as resilient or more robust. And what they then say is, well, if you connect to me over here and to them over there, you'll have two paths out of your country to connect to collaborating institutions internationally. And so that is actually quite a uniform experience across the entire Asia Pacific, from the least developed countries to the most developed countries, I guess.
Well, that's very interesting. I have an intriguing question from your description that also we have the commodity networks, the networks that we get in our homes or on our mobile phones. Dr. Markus, you think those commodity networks one day can replace the need for the research and education networks, or they are synergistic with each other?
There are some people who think that the commodity internet is always improving dramatically. Year on year, we talk about the mobile networks from 2G to 3G to 4G to 5G. Future will have 6G and 7G and so on. And each time the mobile networks improve, they say it will solve all problems. So the way we talk about 5G today, it's like it will solve all the problems that we've had before. But when you look at it technically, it's an incremental improvement. It's not transformative. The thing with your typical home connection, if you're lucky, in most countries, you'll get a few megabits, maybe a few gigabits if you're at a larger institution. The backbones that the NRENs build are 100 gigabits or more, and they have a much smaller population on them because they only support research and education. And so there's much less collision. All the commodity networks provided by the carriers, they run them like the roads. You keep filling them up, and then eventually you get a traffic jam, and so you add an extra lane or you build a new bridge or something like that. The NRENs, they add a whole new freeway. In fact, multiple freeways each time they upgrade. So they're always well ahead of what the commodity internet can offer. And so a commercial commodity provider wants their networks to be 50%, 70% full. The NRENs want their networks to be like 2 or 3% full. Yep. So that when one researcher like Professor Ono comes along and says, I need to download many terabytes of climate data to model this typhoon, he can do it in minutes, not in days or weeks. Right, and that's what transforms research. So I think they are, always going to be synergistic in that way.
Okay, that's really important for our listeners, viewers to learn that national research and education networks, no matter whatever commodity networks offer us, we need to equip our universities, our research centers with the ability to download, upload data very, very quickly. This is the time of the big data, running models with artificial intelligence, and for saving lives, minutes matter. So we have to reach that capability, and also to be able to access research anywhere in the world, and open science, which is a big part of UNESCO's work now. it can only be enabled by, and I will come back to the next part about the resilience, and you have already very capably described, Dr. Markus. Resilience also is needed for research and education networks. If there is a disaster like an earthquake, how can we recover quickly? And of course, then the content itself. So I will come back after I talk to Professor Ono. Professor Ono, you have brought many things to help bring resilience, and notably, following from Dr. Markus, there is a disaster data center, and also you have World BOSAI Forum. Can you please tell us about these two and other related initiatives and what triggered them for you to take leadership on them?
Yeah, thank you, Shahbaz. First, this disaster data thing. The Sendai framework, as I said, the targets, the 7 targets, the monitoring is needed by the UNDRR. Then to assist this monitoring, we developed this center in 2015, and the concept was developed in 2015. This is to assist monitoring, which means that each government needs to understand how many people are killed by disaster, what kind of hazards, and how much economic losses were made by each disaster, or hopefully by the small detailed statistics like how many people are killed, not only how many people are killed, but male or female, gender, or the age groups, economic groups, and so on. The more detailed you know, the more precise and effective policy would be generated. So this center is trying to get the data from the national government. The national government should have the disaster statistics. Many of the countries in Asia didn't have those statistics. Recent, maybe 10 years, 20 years, some governments started doing it. And Indonesia is very good. And Japan has a long time having this data. And even that, as of 2015, developed countries like UK or United States, New Zealand, maybe Australia, didn't have an official national disaster statistics. So it was a time to develop such statistics by the government. Then university could help the analyzing the data and so on. Then so our center is trying to get the data from the national government, but one university cannot get the national data from the government. So that's why we partnership with the UNDP. The UNDP has been doing this kind of work for maybe 2 decades. So we have a partnership with the UNDP to get the data from the government, starting from 7 pilot countries in Asia. Then we are increasing the number of countries. But after getting these data, we share data with everybody through maybe IT. Then each country can generate analysis, develop analysis for better policy making. So that's one of the purpose of this disaster center. Then we have help by this comes the importance of IT, because I'm not IT literate very much. So I depend on the Fujitsu and some of the IT companies on this collaborator. But we also have individual assistants for this developing the IT system to assist deal with the. So traditionally you have a server data saved in the server, and that was a traditional way, and many governments are doing it. But now the cloud and technology is available, so that it's easier to manage the data. So we are changing to the cloud basis, advocating the importance of cloud-based data management for the governments and so on. So that's a disaster center initiative. And for World BOSAI Forum, the BOSAI is not a bonsai. Some people say bonsai.
Yeah,
plants. Yes. The BOSAI means a disaster reduction in a Japanese term for many years we are using. So the World BOSAI Forum started in, again, the 2015 after the Sendai conference. We Tohoku region after tsunami received a tremendous amount of support, encouragement, and money and so on. We received it, thanks to every country and every kind people. So we wanted to give something back to the world. So that we thought of this idea of having a forum, the learning from Tohoku tsunami disaster to share with other parts of the world. That was one of the area. Then we are, and I'm from university, but we didn't want to limit to the only university. So private sector, government, NGOs, NPOs, and media. So there are many kinds of people. They are all important in disaster risk reduction. So this is the beyond academia, sort of a translateral linkage to invite good ideas to share and disseminated to the world. That's World BOSAI Forum. First one was held in 2017. Then next one was 2019. Then third one was supposed to be happening next year, but due to the COVID-19, we may not have it, maybe postpone it. But instead, the next year is the 10th anniversary of the Tohoku earthquake and tsunami. So we have some idea, maybe we will broadcast our Tohoku recovery from the ground for the 400 kilometers of the Tohoku coastline was devastated by tsunami. So we maybe take a tour, walking tour for 1 month to visit the town by town, the village by village, to broadcast how is things right now to share with the world, to communicate with the world. Maybe we use IT for that. Yes, I stop it.
Well, that's really very interesting, both of these disaster data center to be able to link with the national government and the university outreaching. And of course, there must be many partners, including IT partners. And BOSAI, not MONSAI, as you have rightly described, BOSAI. So, Professor, this BOSAI forum, if I can explore a little bit more, is held in Tohoku. That's where this tsunami happened. Who are the people who participate? These are the people mainly from Japan, or you invite people from other countries to come and learn as well? And how long the forum goes for?
Right. The first forum was held in November 2017. We have about 1,000 participants. Then there's about 30%, 300 were from outside of Japan. Many of them were from Asia and Pacific because it's closer to Japan. Some came from Europe and North America and so on. But we have government officials from developing countries. The JICA invited those people. And there are some university researchers from Asia Pacific. So that about 40 countries attended this conference. And the duration of the conference was for 3 days. But one day before the conference, we had a gathering, was sort of a cultural gathering. In Tohoku, there are many local residents attached to the culture in terms of disaster risk reduction. The disaster risk reduction is part of their culture, the way of dancing, songs, music, but then embedded into their culture for many years, including the storytelling and so on. So we featured these things in one event. There was one cultural event to share many pieces of these Tohoku people to perform in front of the people. So it's not a seminar kind of thing. It's a real play and music and shows. So that is adding to this 3-day conference. So that's the shape of the conference.
This is certainly very interesting for people that after the disaster, as part of building resilience, such forums can help us remember, but at the same time continue to improve and going around the area, linking with the local culture, with the local life, and understanding how people have built back better. So it's a real example from that point, if I've understood it correctly, Professor Ono. And I invite colleagues to look at the internet to see World BOSAI Forum and how it works. And there can be such efforts in other countries as well who are stuck with similar disasters. And there can be a network of such countries working together. And you have many international students in your university, Professor Ono?
Yes. We have, I have to check, but we have maybe 20,000 professors and students together. Then maybe 10% maybe coming from outside of Japan. And we have lots of Indonesian students and Chinese and Koreans. Those are 3 top maybe. Then Vietnamese and the Philippines. So yes.
20,000 faculty and research students. Is that right?
Researchers, yes, right.
Researchers. So 20,000 researchers, if I can say.
Yeah. I think we are one of the largest the national universities in Japan, the 3rd oldest.
Okay. Thank you very much. Let me now come to Markus again. Dear Dr. Markus, you have described the resilience of the networks, and Professor Ono has really taken us to the actual situation with the disaster data center also, where such networks can be important. So my question is, how do you help build the resilience using these networks? Of course, with UNESCO, you have collaborated with us. We have this Connect Asia initiative. We work with you to provide some of the content before, like in Bandung many years ago. So tell us more about DRR and the networks, how they work on the content.
There's actually many aspects to this. If I talk about the infrastructure first, one of the things that happens in a disaster is, if you lose connectivity, you lose the ability to share information, to tell people what's happening, where things are happening, and so on. And so we're seeing a lot of efforts going into building disaster response networks. So very quickly deploying network infrastructure into an area that has had a disaster. There's some lovely work being done in the Philippines where they build an ad hoc network to support the responders across a region to have a local mesh network that might be a replacement for the local commodity phone network, for example. And there are even companies like Google and previously Facebook who are talking about using balloons and drones and so on to provide network coverage for those areas that might have been impacted by a disaster. And so the NRENs quite often will partner with those providers or even with the commodity providers to give access to researchers and responders to deliver information and to draw information. Information goes both ways. And so, having that ability to respond quickly requires a relationship. And that means being ready to talk to whichever government agencies, communication providers, and so on are providing services or could be providing services. So we try and plan ahead a little bit. And, some disasters are more predictable than others. And so, the preparation varies by country. For the people, though, it's making them aware of what the community is out there, who is willing to help. We've seen that most recently, of course, this year with the COVID work, where the willingness of the community to share data and experimental outcomes and clinical outcomes in hospitals has been almost unprecedented. That seems to be the word of 2020, unprecedented. The working groups in APAN focus a lot on building those human knowledge networks so that when something happens or when something is predicted to happen, they can bring resources to bear. So they might say, we're going to need to share some data. We're going to need to share some computing capacity. We're going to need some new tools to enable us to collaborate. And in each case, it just builds resilience into that support community so that when something does happen, and it's always when, there can be a relatively quick response. And in some cases, when we've had a major event occur, I can think back to the terrorist attacks in the US back in 2001. The NREN there had network infrastructure into parts of New York that allowed students and staff to make phone calls. And they have a lot of international students. And the normal commodity networks went down, but the universities still had network capacity through the NREN. And so they provided, immediately, like within an hour or so, the ability for people to make phone calls. And that was fundamental to be able to share, I'm okay, and also here is the data about what's happening here. So it can be quite a responsive community in those situations.
That's very important from infrastructure point of view. And you also work very actively with many organizations, including UNESCO, to bring the experts to speak to the people who are more expert in the areas of infrastructure, but they need to know what are the needs from the point of view of those professions. Can you please tell us a bit more about that?
So the APAN meetings themselves are designed to bring the international community to the host in each case. And so a typical APAN meeting, I think I mentioned 300, 400 people. probably half are international, half are local.
Yeah.
So what we're doing in each case is we're capacity building and capability building in each host economy as we have a meeting there. And so we bring the world's best network engineers, we bring the world's leading agricultural researchers, or the world's best telemedicine developers, or disaster and risk planning, which brings together remote sensing and data analysis and hydrology and modeling and all these different things. But it also brings in, we have an e-culture working group. And in some cases, we are trying to capture, cultural information about communities. And so, which may get, slowly erode and devolve away. And so having that huge event in each case, in each economy, helps the local economy. And it also builds those local communities, those local networks, to know, oh, there is somebody who knows about how to deal with the typhoon impact on a banana plantation or a rice field or something like that. And they know who to call. And so we try and bring in, not just through the working groups, but through our keynote speakers, through other experts that we bring usually on site, face to face, to talk to the communities and to share with them. But we also have keynote speakers from those economies who tell us about the problems there or the successes they've had. We have government people quite often present and give us information there. And then right at the other end of the scale, we also bring in students. Okay. We have a fellowship program that we run in APAN. It's small, it doesn't have a lot of money yet, working on that. But we bring in students to start the human networking at a very early age. And so they are, they're going to be early career researchers. And so they start to understand how this connectivity works and how technology can enable their research and their education and so on. So it's very much about building that expertise, that capability in each country.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much. That's really the end of our formal process of talking on these issues. And I also note that the next APAN gathering is in Islamabad. And if the COVID allows, there will be a physical gathering. Otherwise, we will be using e-connectivity. My final request from you, dear Dr. Markus, what would you advise us as this very important initiative with the government of Japan on science for sustainable development? How can we work together, and also the areas in your view where there can be a bigger impact from science?
Oh, that I have such a long wish list of things we could do. I mean, putting aside the infrastructure conversation, because that is a local government investment conversation usually. And in some cases, we get major international investments too. But it's that community building activity. We often have technical solutions, but we don't know where the people are with the problems. And so we need to know where people are working on particular issues. I did not know before I joined APAN about the huge impact of the fires in Indonesia, how they were impacting Singapore and Malaysia and the Philippines. And I did not know how the impact of an earthquake in one location triggered a tsunami that could take, a huge area of the Indian Ocean out. And so building communities, making people aware, and supporting that capability building, the training, building skills. It's really great. We can usually find a huge number of people to help, but they need the skills. And so we need to train people. We need to make them aware. We need to help them build those human networks. And that's something that APAN tries really hard to do on a very, very small budget. And events like this really help us to get the message out to say, look, we are here to help. Please join in. APAN is 95% run by volunteers.
So that's where maybe we have a lot more to do together and bring those volunteers together, promote the areas of science, technology, engineering, innovation, what is needed for a better world. And the networks offer us that capability. So thank you for your insight. Now let me bring this final question also to Professor Ono. Professor Ono, you have worked with the United Nations, you have helped SCAP, you have also worked with WMO. You are helping many international initiatives, including the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. Can you please guide us where we can take the science for sustainable development and, of course, for disaster risk reduction in this region, your guidance for our Japan Fund interest efforts into future?
The UNESCO is very unique to have 3 pillars of this: culture, education, and science. And it's all important in disaster risk reduction. Then I think one of the areas UNESCO could do and has been doing is this young researcher or students linkage, networking. Maybe this is linked to what Markus mentioned, but UNESCO could take a lead on this area globally or Asia Pacific wide. So then we have to depend on the future generations for our future, and even the young people. Well, we see them young people are immature and so on, but actually it's not. It's young people have more power and better ideas and wisdoms. So I think it's spotlighting on the youth. It's one of the areas UNESCO could take a lead and assist this development. And one initiative I was engaged, some UNESCO colleagues with me, was regarding the World Bosai Forum, and there was a World Tsunami Awareness Day related event hosted by Japanese government and the UNDRR, which was the Tsunami Museum, International Conference on Tsunami Museums. So a few years ago, I attended this meeting, and I took it very interesting because museums, a place people can come in a very relaxed way, the family and children, they enjoy to come to visit museums. And when I visit in other cities, other countries, then for the holiday, maybe I go to the museum to experience this culture of this country and this cities and so on. But there are some disaster-related museums nowadays observing. The Aceh is having the tsunami museum, and Thailand is having one NGO built tsunami museum, and another one is Ministry of Culture is developing a tsunami museum near Phuket. Then Turkey has earthquake-related museum, and Chile is developing a tsunami-related museum. Japan, there are many museums related to disaster. Then there was a hurricane museum in the coast of Gulf Coast in Texas. So, but we don't know where those disaster-related museums are located, and no network. And there are some networking organization, ICOM, the international sort of networking of these official museums, but these official museums excluding the small museums. So I think the need of networking of a disaster-related museum is there. So I'm being interested. Maybe perhaps with UNESCO we could take up this idea of propagating, at least making a list of where, in which country, what kind of museum is there in the world, so that people know, aware of this museum. So that's, again, the museum is a very good place to learn things in a fun way, the enjoyable manner. Rather than people coming to university, the university professor may be too serious, too technical, too scientific, but museum people can enjoy. So I thought this would be a good initiative. UNESCO could take a lead at this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Ono. Thank you for your wonderful insight. As you already know, also, we have Indian Ocean Tsunami Information Center hosted here in my office with the help of BMKG Indonesia, and we help build the Aceh Tsunami Museum as well. We take your suggestion very seriously, and we will link with you and also link with the World Bosai Forum. So let me do a very quick summary. So I thank Professor Ono for wonderful insights, as well as Dr. Markus for his ideas about connectivity and the role of research and education networks. We have learned from Professor Ono that it's very easy to understand resilience. Think about a bamboo, and following a major wind, if it bends, once the wind goes, it should come back. So the concept of resilience should also have building back better. And Sendai framework, following the Hugo framework, has given us clear 7 targets. And target E relates to building such capacities. And very importantly, we need to work together, bring all members of this society together to understand the reasons for such a disaster, where the best science is, and data centers, the role of those centers to help link all the levels, and then also work across nations to share our knowledge about disaster and disaster risk reduction. And the efforts must be coordinated at the whole of the national level. There must be right kind of enabling environment. And only then we can build resilience so that we can come back to our original position, or even to a better position. Situation with COVID, how do we actually recover our economies, build back better? So all of that is critical. And for that, we need to continue to build capacity. And the experience in Japan, where there has been a serious investment in the areas of disaster risk reduction, the investment in the universities, also Japan is helping with students and researchers from many other countries, is an excellent way for us to build capacity around the whole Asian Pacific region. And it must be done before disasters, as Professor Ono has given us a very clear indication. If we have to deal with disasters, we need to continue to work when the disasters are not there. Be prepared. And when, unfortunately, a disaster strikes, we have to respond very quickly. And that's where the role of data, role of connectivity, all of that is very important. A very clear message that with all these efforts, the number of casualties are going down. But maybe the impact of disasters is even bigger because there is more at stake. And also there are many more disasters we have to deal, which may be because of the natural causes or the man-made causes. So we have to invest more into disaster risk reduction. Then also coming to a wonderful set of interventions from Dr. Markus, research and education networks, very important for us to link university systems, link disaster centers, and they are working on a range of different issues, from agriculture to telemedicine to the all areas which are important, from science and technology, for also from point of view of culture, and also making sure that the human capacity is built. But also the infrastructure should be able to cope with disasters, like if there is a major earthquake, and the research and education networks come back very quickly. And during the times of disasters, when commodity internet may not be there, maybe the national research and education networks and the university networks can help. And we need to continue to build human capacities. And APAN is doing a wonderful job in bringing people from different countries, and also helping understand different perspectives of society, what is needed to be done to continue to build such capacities. Lastly, and I would like to capture this very important message from Professor Ono, that we need to think about many areas and many disciplines, and very clearly the advice that we need to think about culture, we need to think about education, about science, and of course, communication, information, and human rights. All of them are important. And that's where the role of museums can be very important. Like we have the Aceh Museum. There are other examples which Professor Ono has given us. So we need to clearly put this information out there for people to know, help other nations to build similar facilities. We need to remember what happened. We need to understand how people are coping and how things have been built better. And that's where the World BOSAI Forum is an excellent example also, which can help us understand how we continue to build to the next level of resilience and also help others in the process. So with that, I thank again Professor Ono and Dr. Markus for your wonderful interventions, for enlightening our viewers, and for giving very, very clear ideas. We will be connecting with both of you from these multidisciplinary aspects which we can bring to Japan Funds and Trust efforts on science for sustainable development. Thank you. I pass it to our dear colleague, Dr. Sachi.
Thank you very much, Professor Shahbaz, Dr. Markus, and Professor Yuichi, and all participants. The next JFIT Sustainability Insight will be held on Monday, 26 October. The discussion will focus on the empowering access to information. Please don't forget to fill the attendance list through the link that we shared in the chat box and Facebook if you'd like to receive the e-certificate. We keep this form open 1 hour from now. For further information, please visit our Facebook page and Instagram. We wish you a good day, stay safe, and see you at the next session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we will respond to those questions in the usual way. So thank you for those questions.
And we'll post.